Hello everyone, my name is Marie Coffin. I'm pleased to welcome you to this third episode of our Masterclass series for our Executive MBA. The theme today will be value creation in times of crisis. Is marketing dead? To discuss this subject, I'm pleased to welcome Lionel Sitz, who is our marketing professor and one of the director of the Executive MBA.
Thank you very much, Marie. The topic of today is marketing in time of crisis. So is marketing dead, basically, is the thread that I will try to talk about today. Let's start with the summary of what I'm going to talk about. So first, why marketing? Why is marketing important? Why was it created in the first place? Then a phrase that I like, which is, it's just marketing. Then I will present the organizational problems of marketing, then the limits of our planet, and then hopefully open up new ways to rethink marketing, which I will call rethinking marketing. So why marketing and why did marketing emerge in the first place? Might be an interesting question because it's not an easy one. We generally believe that marketing has been there for years, whereas it actually was created in the 19th century in the US. And the point of departure of marketing is a reaction to economics. So if you remember your economical classes, markets have been studied by economists for centuries now. They built theoretical mathematical models which are based on optimization and rationality. So what they try to do is try to understand markets from an optimization and rational perspective. And if you remember correctly your classes, it looks like this. So you have on the one hand prices and on the other hand quantity. The demand is normally, let's say, opposite to prices. The lower the prices, the bigger the quantity, and vice versa. And the supply is the exact opposite. So the higher the price, the bigger the quantity offered. And you have an equilibrium, which is the price of the market and the quantity of the market. Everything looks nice, except there is one problem with that model, which is that logically, if that model was right, margins should tend towards zero. So basically, companies should do zero profits if that model was to be right. And I'm not sure that companies would be very pleased to have zero margin and zero profit at the end. So basically, marketing was a response to that model. And the idea is to better grasp the practical functioning of markets, trying to understand how markets really function and how value is truly created. So the point of departure of marketing is, let's say, a question regarding the way value is created. And the idea of marketing in the first place is value is not in the product. Value is in the transaction, in the exchange. So we can create a surplus of value. And marketing is all about this surplus of value creation. So we try to create a surplus of value that will increase the worth of what is being exchanged. So the point of departure of marketing and why marketing is important in the first place is because we need to create value for the stakeholders of the market. And by doing this, we create a surplus of value by adding cultural and social value to the offers that we are making. So the problem now with marketing, the first problem of marketing, and I will present two other problems. The first problem of marketing is its bad reputation. So basically, marketing is generally, let's say, seen as the devil. Usually, when we use marketing in the daily context, we use it in a specific sentence, which is, it's just marketing. And it's just marketing means it's a crappy product that is oversold and that I will never buy because it's useless. And the main problem, the main social problem or societal problem of marketing is that it is just marketing. So marketing has a bad image because it is seen as something that is not creating true value. So here is an example of
Marketing 101. If you live in any major city, you see 800 ads a day. In most of them, models are going to be looking at you like they want to fuck you. You're so used to this that you don't even notice it anymore. But your body does. Your heart rate increases, your pupils dilate, you breathe faster, you become more alert. You've been tapped. Looking at a billboard's supposed to feel like love at first sight, but it's not real. It's just marketing.
So as this extract from a movie called Syrup shows, it's just marketing. It's not reality. So marketing is, a lie basically that is said to enhance reality and to sell more and more products. So marketing is basically the devil. Marketing is something that is opposed to people. And the problem with that is every time people detect marketing in your efforts, marketing is useless. So basically what is important to understand is marketing can function only if it actually is able not to be seen by people. If people perceive marketing to be marketing, then marketing doesn't function and basically is dead. So when people talk about marketing, what they basically say is that the product that is just marketing is useless, has no point of being sold, and has no interest for them. And there's another societal problem for marketing, which comes from the confusion between marketing and advertising. Yes, marketing uses advertising, but marketing is not restricted to advertising. Marketing is a global process whereby we try to create a surplus of value. And what is important to understand is that marketing is not just the product of specialized professional marketers, but we all participate in marketing. Consumers, stakeholders, media, influencers, we all participate in the broad picture of marketing. If we stop consuming once and for all, then markets will disappear, simply. The problem for marketers is that their bad reputation precedes them. So every time you perceive a marketing intent, you basically reject that intent and you reject the proposition that has been made, even though it might be an interesting product, even though it might be a great service. The simple reputation of marketing is there to kill the exchange that might have occurred otherwise. So good marketing is invisible because a visible marketing is a marketing that will be just marketing. So having said this, we have a second problem for marketing which comes from the organization itself. Marketing has difficulty showing results, and that causes a lot of trouble in organizations and companies. So first, marketing teams are often siloed. Very often you have a bunch of specialists of marketing that are focused on mere details. Very often they speak in acronyms, right? They use very catchy acronyms that no one understands. The function is very often undermined, meaning that the marketing people are often seen as, let's say, support services and not key components of the company. And that causes a problem, which is that marketing is siloed, and by being focused on mere details like the color codes or the font or the PowerPoint presentation that you have to use, by focusing on these mere details, which are important, but by focusing on these details, the problem is that very often they tend to appear as non-strategic teams in organization. The second element, which is problematic from an organizational standpoint, is that marketers are caught in a double bind. On the one hand, they need to show short-term results, and in the meantime, they need to build long-term brands. So there's here a double bind. You can show short-term results by very specific operations, like reducing price. The problem is, if you do this, if you reduce prices, for instance, you will increase your sales in the short run. The problem is in the long term, you damage your brand. So marketers are very often caught in this, contradiction, inherent contradiction. On the one hand, they need to show very short-term results while still building in the long term the results for tomorrow. And that is something that is very difficult to achieve because there is a tragedy of horizons. If you work for the long term, you need to sacrifice some short-term elements. And in the meantime, if you focus only on the long term, then your short-term results will be damaged. So you need to find a difficult balance between short-term and long-term. The third organizational difficulty for marketers comes from the fact that it is difficult to show return on investment. Spending invisible, the budget you allocate to marketing. That is simple to do. You just have to make a calculation and you see how much you're spending. That is visible and that is very easily shown by finance. The problem is that results are almost impossible to measure. For instance, a spending like advertising, you know how much you spend in advertising. But the results you got from advertising is difficult to measure because advertising very often doesn't function in the short term. So I do an advertisement and then I see the results. But the results in the short term are not that present. So in other words, one of the biggest challenges for marketing is to be able to show the utility of the spending that they are trying to do for the company. And basically trying not to be perceived as pure sink costs. So marketing in a nutshell has an organizational problem which comes from the fact that it is siloed. It has a double bind intrinsic to the discipline, and it's difficult for them to show the return on the investment that have been made. And very often the spending in marketing is tremendous, and it's difficult to be able to really measure what you receive in exchange of these efforts done in marketing. There's a third problem for marketing that is more contemporaneous, which is the limits of our planet. The climate change, the shrinking biodiversity, all the problems that we hear every day in the news are there as a critic for marketing, and I will try to explain why. So Earth is our only planet, that's for sure, and marketing is partly responsible for the climate change, the shrinking biodiversity, and all of this. So marketing tries to increase revenues. So in trying to do so, what they try to do is selling ever more, pushing people to consume, and drive to falsely innovate. I'm sure that you all have seen these not so innovative products labeled new or new recipe or innovative stuff. And this is a problem because it tends to make people consume products that are not necessarily do not necessarily have a utility for people. Very often we are pushed to change our smartphone, we are pushed to change our car, our clothes, even though they are not necessarily used yet. So in other words, marketing is partly responsible for the overconsumption of our society. It's not the only responsible, but it's partly responsible because the marketing efforts are still pushing people in a direction that is not the right direction. So marketing tries to increase revenue by selling more when we already consume too much. In 2022, Earth Overshoot Day, which is a day when humanity is using more resources than the planet is capable of recreating in a year. And last year, the Earth Overshoot Day was July 28th. So it means that we consume 75% more than the planet can regenerate. And again, marketing plays a role in that overconsumption. It's not the only one, but it plays a role in that overconsumption. And one of the reasons why marketing is partly responsible is that marketing is still relying on what we might call an extractivist culture. It's difficult to say. So basically, what is not marketed, what doesn't have a price, what is not, priced in some ways, is simply not considered. Either something is sellable and is being sold and has a price, or it's not, and then it's simply not worth mentioning and envisioning that element. So there's a lack of ethical considerations and a lack of questioning about the role of marketing in that particular overconsumption of our society. We live in a consumption society, and we have been living in such a society for a long time now. And marketing has a problem, which is that it is part of all the elements that are not going good for our planet. So the question now is marketing dead, or should we try to rethink marketing to somehow reboot the system or reboot the philosophy of marketing? And what is interesting here is to see that rethinking marketing is actually going back to the basics. If we want to rethink marketing, we have to go back to the roots of what made marketing interesting in the first place. And going back to the roots would be to support a sober culture. And when I say sober culture, it's trying to find a way to participate in stop selling more and sell better. Reunite value and values. So trying to find a way to, in the meantime, grasp value, but be authentic to the value, to the cultural and social values that actually should be irrigating marketing. We should try to change the logic in a sense that marketing could and should participate in the cultural change. And for this, marketing should change the outlook, try to nudge people for a more responsible consumption. And a more responsible consumption means that we could and we should be more reflexive about what we consume and how we consume. Because very often we tend to have simple answers to difficult problems. And I'll try to explain this in a moment, but marketing should try to make people reflect on their own consumption, and in the meantime, trying to promote better alternatives, not those who are necessarily making more profit, but those who might be more beneficial for our environment and our society. So one of the elements that is really needed right now is to extend the network under consideration. We need to reflexively analyze all the consequences of one's production, and not just the obvious one. Very often we tend to simplify the problem. And if we want to rethink marketing, and if we want marketing to play a role, a positive role in the future, we need to stop having simplistic solutions and stop having simplistic mode of reasoning and embrace a culture of complexity. We need to find a way to better understand all the consequences of what our products are doing to the planet and to the society. For that matter, I just want to take one simple example, which is the electric cars. So all the manufacturers today are pushing into electric cars, which today is considered as the solution to all the environmental problem for cars, which might be true in a way. It's true that when you use an electric car, you do not emit any greenhouse gas. That's true. When you push your engine, you simply emit some water. That's all. The problem is that electric cars have to be produced, and this production is not that harmless to nature. Just a simple comparison between the minerals used for electric cars compared to conventional cars. As you can see, for a conventional car, you use approximately 30 kilograms of minerals, whereas in an electric car, you use more than 200 kilograms. So in terms of electric cars, it might be a solution, not the solution, but a solution if we reconsider the car system, if we reconsider the number of kilometers we are doing, the size of the cars, the weight, and all the elements that compose the car. So basically, having a Tesla is actually not harmful for the environment. You have a lot of minerals that are used that needs to be extracted from our planet. So in other words, a solution like electric cars, if you industrialize it, if marketing participates in making electric cars seen as the solution to the planet and problems, you participate in a simplistic and problematic answer. Whereas if you try to navigate the changes that are needed in the car industry, you might have a positive impact on the, let's say, the greenhouse emission overall. So in other words, rather than only considering what is obvious, like greenhouse emission, we should try to consider and to envision networks of consequences and analyze these consequences and then act from a marketing perspective to try to better the situation rather than worsening it. So rethinking marketing is not enough, and marketing should lead a cultural change. Marketing is not dead, but it should be about transforming markets and culture. And for this, we need a more global change, which is that, for instance, the way we measure our impact on the planet, the way we measure our, let's say, contribution should not be only seen through one simplistic dimension, but rather in a pluralistic network way. Because, as I said earlier, we consume way too much products. To give you an idea, during the Middle Age, a normal average household would have less than 300 objects in the household. And remember, in the Middle Ages, the households were bigger than today's household. You would have the grandmother, grandfather, parents, children under the same roof. 300 objects. In today's America, average household have more than 30,000 products in their house, which is a huge difference in terms of the number of objects you possess, without mentioning that these objects are far more impactful for our environment than the Middle Ages products. So we need to collectively act in order to be able to grasp the potential of marketing, the transformational potential of marketing. And to do so, we need to revise the way we do marketing. So stop trying to sell more and trying to sell better. For instance, if we go with consuming less, so consuming less product, less services, to try to have less impact on the planet, if we just stop there, if we just stop consuming products and do not try to enhance the overall situation, we will decrease the well-being of people. So if we want to decrease consumption, marketing needs to enhance consuming less, needs to enhance having less products in your house. So in other words, we should try to reboot the system in a way that make consumers see that having less is not having less well-being, but simply a different well-being. Having just one smartphone and a smartphone that is 4 years old is not a problem in itself, but it's a problem in our system in which we constantly try to render the new products better than the old one, and we create a craving for ever new products. So in other words, marketing can be rethought if and only if we change the way we overlook also let's say the measurement points. If you measure the efficiency of marketing only by the number of sales, only by the margin created, then you have a problem, which is that you still only measure the economical reality and not the biodiversity, the greenhouse gas emission, etc., etc. But, and it's another element, we should also try to stop having a simplistic approach of these problems, which are really complex and should be treated in a complex way. For instance, if you take biodiversity, yes, biodiversity is linked to climate change. But for instance, having a cat, for instance, participate in the decline of biodiversity. In the US alone, it's estimated that domestic cats are responsible for 3 billion deaths among birds and 6 billion among mammals. So it means that small things like having a cat or having an electric car or a conventional car participate in this overconsumption, and what is needed for tomorrow is that marketing take the lead in trying to change our lifestyles, to decrease our toll on the planet and our environment. And again, to do this, we need to go from a classical economical marketing to a more cultural marketing, where we will try to build up a system that can be sustainable in the long run with sustainable products, with products that are not necessarily changed every 2 years or every 3 years, but rather that are inscribed in the time. So rather having a strategy like Patagonia, where you don't buy what you don't need, than the fast fashion, which is constantly pushing new clothes, new colors for new seasons, for consumers that truly do not necessitate all these clothes on a daily basis. So I'm not suggesting that we should have a horrible and boring life, but simply that we should try to value more elements that are less harmful on our planet. And again, marketing with its capacity to lead people to certain direction, to nudge people to do certain things and avoid other things, might be a key factor in trying to get a sober society and a sober consumption. I'm finished. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much. It was very interesting, Lionel. We do have already a few questions. So you just mentioned Patagonia, actually, and one of the questions was, do you have examples of firms which have a responsible marketing strategy?
Good question. I would say, yes, there are, but very often those companies are companies that do not reach a very prominent position. So very often they are SMEs rather than big companies, because up to a certain point, when you reach a certain size, you have shareholders, and those shareholders ask you for a certain amount of margin per year. And as I mentioned earlier, if we do not have an aggressive strategy, then our margin tend towards zero or even below. So yes, there are companies. Patagonia is a good example, but a lot of SMEs. I think I have one example in mind. It's a French SME called Le Drive Tout Nu, which is trying to decrease the number of over packaging and try to find a way to have sustainable products in their stores. So to answer the question clearly, big companies are very rare to have a sustainable marketing strategy, but SMEs are capable because they depend on the values more than the value in an economical way. Was I clear?
Yes, thank you. And maybe to add on this, how can big corporations shift to volumes, to this value creation, which is actually linked to another question, which is how would the firm survive if we consume less products?
Good question. I'd say you can put the question in another way. How can our planet survive if we continue consuming that much? So companies versus planets. But to answer the question, I'm not suggesting, this is why earlier I said we need to sell, we need to stop trying to sell ever more and sell better. I'm not suggesting that we should not make profits. And if you know this concept, you have the donut economy, whereby we are in a donut. We cannot consume under a certain level, otherwise we will have famine and other plagues. But we cannot consume over a certain amount. So you have a donut, right, a round object, and clearly today we are over the donut. We consume way too much. But to go back to companies, what you can try to do is stop playing on increasing consumption every single time. But for instance, try companies that produce smartphones could change the way they market their smartphones, and rather than selling the smartphone, they could offer it as a service. And if you sell it as a service, then you have the revenues. You still have the revenue streams, but you can change the smartphones and recycle all the elements of the smartphones. Same when you are a company like I don't know, SEB, for instance. SEB is a company that is moving toward this sustainable marketing, where they systematically measure the impact on the environment of their existing but also their new products in order to see whether or not the product is an enhancement or not. And if the product is too harmful for the environment, they decide not to launch it, even though that might be a product that could generate revenues. So in other words, I'm not suggesting that we should, cut our arms and stop making profit, but maybe not at all cost, and maybe not at the costs of our own planet for our own children.
Another question, what about entreprise à mission? Is it a valuable first step to switch from economical market scheme toward a more cultural market approach? I guess valuable in terms of a dollar here? It definitely helps. I wouldn't say because you're an entreprise à mission, you are necessarily sustainable, but it has two advantages to be clear. One is that you need to prove your actions, so that's one element. You have the obligation to show that you have taken measures. That's one side, and you have another side, which is that it's also a political device that allows you to, for instance, negotiate with your shareholders. The example of Danone is I think quite interesting. So Danone became an entreprise à mission, but the shareholders fired the CEO because the results were not there. So in a way, it's an example that it can also fail. It's not the only solution, and it's not a silver bullet. It's one device, one tool that you can use to try to change the culture. But really, if we want to really rethink marketing, we also need to rethink finance. We need, for instance, to rethink the way we think about growth, because economical growth is for us a given. When we change our job, we want higher salaries. When we put our money in the bank, we want to have interests and nice interest rates. The thing is,
if we all want ever more with what compared to what we have today, we have again a problem of the growth of the natural resources. And again, I'm not saying we should stop consuming everything, but try to consume less, but better, in a better way.
Thank you. If you have further questions, do not hesitate to ask them on the chat, because for now I think we've rounded up all the questions that we had. Thank you very much, Lionel, for this presentation. We will be live again on May 11th for our 4th episode on CSR with Hans Schlieder. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope to see you soon during our next episode.